In this module, we'll be extending the projectile class firing logic to be easily updated in the editor to allow us to choose the type of projectile that we want our current pawn to fire. So this will all be done from within our pawn class. And to begin, I'm just going to start in the header file. And the first thing we want to do is actually expose the type of projectile that we'll be firing later. Because again, at the moment, we're kind of hard at defining that we'll be firing the only type of projectile that we have, which is fine because we don't have anything else to swap between. But let's just go and take a quick look at what this means. So over in the code file, if we scroll all the way down here in the pawn class again, we can see we have a function call here to the spawn actor, and this is spawning specifically the A twin stick projectile class. So this is never going to be overridden. We won't have any kind of flexibility or option to change this, and that's what we'll be addressing by the end of this module. To do this, we'll first need to be in our header file again, so back in the A pawn header file or the A twin stick pawn header file. You can do this pretty much anywhere, but I'm just going to drop this in the public section for simplicity. And what we'll do is we'll just create a new T subclass of. We'll make this the A twin stick projectile, and I'll name this one projectile. Then to get rid of the error that we have just here, we just need to go back up and make sure that we include, I'll just use a forward declaration to the twin stick projectile class, just so that the header will know what that means when it gets to our new variable type. Then back over in the code file, we can now use this just for simplicity, as we're going to have the same problem up here. I'm going to go straight to the includes and make sure that we include the twin stick projectile that's already in here. Of course, because that's being spawned, so that is fine. Which means we can just navigate back down. We'll go back here, and what we want to do, very simple really, is we can just add a new argument here. So there's an argument override available for us, and we're just going to pass in the projectile. So this is now saying that we'll spawn a class of the type A twin stick projectile, which remember all of our blueprint children are a type deriving from our C++ class, but we then will specify which version of that class we're going to spawn just here, which will be the projectile that we can pass in via the editor. And that just reminds me, one thing we need to go back and do in the header file is we're going to come back in and make sure that with our newly defined property down here, we're just going to come in and we'll give this a U property. We'll make this one editable anywhere, so we can change this anywhere in the editor. And I'll just give this one a category named projectile so that we can easily define what this is and find it when we're looking for this in the editor. And with that done, I'm just going to Control-Shift-B to compile this. And once that's finished compiling, we'll just make sure we don't have any spelling errors, but we can then move over to the editor and we can see some of our updates and improvements in action. Okay, so with that compiled and back over in the editor, I'm just going to find the twin stick pawn here, as we obviously can't see that in the level still if you followed along exactly. So with the twin stick pawn selected, just going to go into the search details and type projectile, because remember that's the name of the category. And we can see just here that under the projectile category, we have our projectile property, which is going to be the type of class we're looking to fire at this stage. So if we were to press play at the moment and try firing anything, this wouldn't work because it's now looking for a specific variable or a specific property to spawn, a class type. So what you would probably want to do in a full project as well is also do some isValid check or check that the class has been provided a type. Otherwise, you're going to enter some errors or just non-spawning issues. But just for some quick demonstrations, all we need to do is make sure that we pass in a projectile type. We can start with the normal one, so this will look as it was previously. And I'm getting some issues here, and this is, again, kind of where these problems start coming into play, is because I've got the player start in the world. I think it's trying to spawn a different class, so I'm going to need to remove the player start so that we can remove this option as well. And I'm going to reset this to be the default pawn, kind of forcing it to auto-receive input for this example, so that I'm controlling the right pawn. So it's the auto-possessed player to player 0. So now if we press play, we get the pawn, which cannot be seen. Okay, and I was getting some issues here for the demonstration where the projectile wasn't spawning. So I've done some testing off screen, and it looks as though the new classes have an issue with collision where they're overlapping with the player and just immediately destroying themselves. So if you get the same thing, just for testing purposes at the moment, what I've done is that I've turned all of the collision presets on the projectile blueprints to no collision for the time being, just until we get the whole project set up and working together as intended. Again, a nice simple fix. and made possible by exposing everything into blueprints. With that done though, what I'll do is I'll just show some examples. So this is using the normal projectile for now. And of course, that looks very much like what we had previously. This is the kind of projectile types the project started with. But on top of this, we can now come in and we can just select our projectile class, change this to projectile fast and see how this one looks. And you can see that based on the color and the speeds, this would immediately show us that this doesn't work because it's so fast and the same color as the floor that we cannot see it. So again, very simple workaround here. What we can do for every class of this type is come in and let's just change the color to yellow again. So it's the same color as one of the other projectiles, but at least it will be visible. And we can see at the very least the increase in speed, and that does in fact work. So again, a nice quick change thanks to blueprints there. And then finally, just to confirm that everything is working as intended, we'll go back into the pawn, change this to the projectile slow. And we can see there, this projectile is looking quite interesting, in fact, and is completely unique from the others. We've got the blue coloring. It goes quite slow and it looks as though it's creating more of a pattern. So that works quite well. And again, that was from a very quick test example. So we now have 3 very different projectile types that we can very easily swap between. All of this has been made possible by sharing the logic between the C++ parent class. So we've exposed that variable in the parent class. We've used that in the C++ code, so all of the logic is still happening there, but we've exposed the visual side of things and the kind of quick editor interface prototyping between the blueprint subclasses that we now have access to. So with all of that done, in this module, we've extended the player class firing functionality, which will allow us for very dynamic and easy updates to the type of projectile class to spawn inside of that firing function.